ultimately, does this mean that the EU tariff hammer is going to fall on Chinese EV exports, and how severe could those tariffs be?
In a surprising turn of events, the European Union has made a strategic decision that could reshape the global electric vehicle (EV) landscape and deal a heavy blow to the American auto industry. The EU has chosen to open its market to Chinese electric vehicles, providing China with a gateway into one of the most competitive and valuable automotive markets in the world. This decision comes at a time when the United States, under President Trump's leadership, has imposed aggressive tariffs on foreign auto imports to shield domestic manufacturers. In contrast, the EU appears to be moving in the opposite direction, welcoming foreign competition in hopes of advancing its clean energy goals. China has spent the past decade rapidly expanding its EV sector, driven by massive government support, advanced battery technologies, and a highly efficient manufacturing infrastructure. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng have emerged as leaders, offering electric cars that are not only affordable, but also competitive in quality and innovation. The European Union's decision to give these companies access to its market could significantly accelerate their global expansion. China's dominance in the battery supply chain, particularly in lithium-ion battery production and refinement of critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, further strengthens its position. This control allows Chinese manufacturers to dictate pricing and secure a consistent supply of resources, advantages that European and American automakers struggle to match. Beyond affordability, Chinese companies have also been at the forefront of developing advanced features, such as vehicle-to-grid integration, improved battery efficiency, and autonomous driving technology. These innovations position Chinese EVs as highly attractive options in international markets. By opening up to Chinese electric vehicles, the EU hopes to satisfy growing demand for low-emission transportation while providing consumers with more affordable choices. This move supports Europe's broader strategy of transitioning to clean energy, but it also introduces significant risks. European automakers like Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz face rising pressure. Although they've made strides in electrification, they still grapple with high production costs, complex supply chains, and regulatory challenges. Competing with low-cost, high-tech Chinese models could force European firms to either slash prices or ramp up innovation, both costly strategies. The EU's shift comes at a moment of heightened tension between the United States and China. With Washington imposing tariffs to protect domestic industry, Europe's openness to Chinese imports could signal a broader divergence in global trade policy. The American approach centers on shielding domestic industries through trade barriers, while the EU is embracing global competition to speed up its green transition. This divergence could have lasting consequences not just for auto manufacturers, but for international alliances and economic dynamics. In the United States, protectionist policies were introduced to preserve jobs and keep foreign competition at bay. Yet these tariffs have also driven up costs for both consumers and manufacturers. American automakers now face higher input costs, including those for batteries and other EV components. Meanwhile, they are increasingly isolated from key international markets like Europe and China, markets that are essential for scaling production and funding innovation. Without access to these markets, American car makers risk falling behind in both technology and affordability. This isolation is particularly damaging as global demand for EVs surges. While Tesla remains a major player, even it faces high production expenses and supply chain constraints. Other U.S. manufacturers continue to struggle with profitability in the electric segment. In contrast, Chinese EV makers can leverage lower labor costs, vertical supply chains, and strong domestic demand to scale rapidly and offer compelling products at lower prices. Infrastructure development also plays a crucial role. China and Europe have made significant investments in EV charging networks and renewable energy integration, essential components for mass EV adoption. The U.S. has lagged behind in this area, further limiting the attractiveness and practicality of electric vehicles for American consumers. As the EU continues to welcome Chinese electric vehicles, the speed at which infrastructure is being built across Europe is likely to increase, making the region even more EV-friendly and reinforcing the competitive advantage of Chinese models. The outcome of these differing strategies could define the next decade of the auto industry. Europe's choice to align with China on EVs could help it meet climate goals more quickly, offer better value to consumers, and spur technological growth. However, it also exposes the region to economic and geopolitical vulnerabilities, particularly if Chinese firms gain significant control over key segments of the European market. For the United States, the emphasis on protectionism might yield short-term benefits for domestic manufacturers, but it risks stifling competition and innovation. If American automakers are unable to reduce costs, improve technology, or gain access to large global markets, they may find themselves increasingly marginalized in a rapidly evolving industry. As Chinese electric vehicles roll into Europe, the balance of power in the global auto market is clearly shifting. Whether this move ultimately strengthens the EU's green ambitions or opens the door to long-term dependence on Chinese technology remains to be seen. What is certain is that the landscape is changing, and those who fail to adapt may find themselves left behind. The European Union's decision to allow Chinese electric vehicles into its market marks a turning point in the global auto industry, one with significant implications for the United States. While Europe embraces competition in a bid to accelerate its green transition, the U.S. has taken a more defensive stance, erecting trade barriers and imposing tariffs to shield domestic automakers. Yet this approach, intended to protect American industry, may end up isolating it from the fastest-growing sectors of the global economy. The United States has struggled to build the infrastructure necessary to support widespread EV adoption. Limited investment in charging networks, supply chains, and clean energy integration has slowed progress. Trade restrictions have only made matters worse by raising costs for key components like batteries and semiconductors. Meanwhile, American automakers are grappling with rising production expenses and supply chain instability, leaving them unable to match the affordability and technological edge of their Chinese counterparts. As China expands its global footprint, Europe is becoming its next major market. Chinese EV manufacturers have spent years building a robust and vertically integrated industry, supported by generous government subsidies and tight control over the battery supply chain. Their vehicles are not only competitively priced, but increasingly high in quality and innovation. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng are developing cutting-edge technologies, from advanced battery systems to autonomous driving features, that many Western automakers are still racing to catch up with. By opening its doors to Chinese EVs, the EU is betting on affordability, scalability, and innovation to help meet its carbon reduction targets. This is placing enormous pressure on legacy European manufacturers who face high labor costs and stricter regulations. But it's also triggering alarm bells in the US, where automakers risk being left behind in both production and innovation. The inability to compete with China's speed and efficiency could force American companies to reduce output, outsource production, or lay off workers, all of which run counter to the goals of recent protectionist policies. The stakes are especially high for American workers. Many jobs in the auto industry, particularly in manufacturing-heavy states like Michigan and Ohio, are now at risk. If U.S. automakers cannot find ways to cut costs and expand globally, they may be forced to scale back operations, hurting not just factory workers, but the broader economy. Ironically, the very tariffs designed to protect these jobs may be accelerating their disappearance, as domestic firms lose access to vital components in foreign markets. At the same time, China is leveraging its dominance in the battery supply chain to dictate global prices and standards. Its control over key raw materials, such as lithium, nickel, and cobalt, gives it significant leverage in shaping the future of EV technology. With lower production costs and a high level of vertical integration, Chinese firms are able to produce vehicles quickly and affordably. Their cars are also becoming increasingly attractive to consumers in developing nations, where demand for cost-effective alternatives to gas-powered vehicles is growing rapidly. As Chinese EVs gain traction in Europe and beyond, their presence is reshaping global market dynamics. Emerging markets long priced out of electric mobility are now turning to China for solutions. This surge in international demand further solidifies China's leadership in the EV revolution, allowing it to scale production and invest even more heavily in research and development. Meanwhile, Europe's strategy is also geopolitical. By deepening economic ties with China, the EU is signaling a shift away from US-centric trade relationships. As Washington doubles down on tariffs and domestic industry protection, the EU is opting for engagement with China to advance its climate goals. This divergence in approach could strain transatlantic relations and limit Washington's influence over future global trade agreements. especially those involving clean energy and transportation. The consequences may extend far beyond the auto sector. If the U.S. remains on a protectionist path, while Europe and China build deeper economic links, American companies could find themselves increasingly excluded from international supply chains and innovation ecosystems. This would not only undermine U.S. competitiveness in EVs, but in other high-tech sectors as well. Even Tesla, the crown jewel of America's EV industry, is facing challenges. While it has led in innovation and market adoption, the company is now contending with regulatory pressure, logistical bottlenecks, and a growing list of foreign rivals. Chinese automakers in particular are catching up fast, offering comparable technology at lower prices and with quicker turnaround. China's lead in infrastructure is also critical. It has rapidly built out EV charging networks, integrated renewable energy sources, and developed smart grid systems that support vehicle-to-grid technology. These developments are making electric vehicles more practical and appealing to a global audience. The U.S., by contrast, continues to lag in infrastructure rollouts, adding another layer of difficulty for domestic manufacturers. The global auto industry is undergoing a major transformation, and the center of gravity is shifting east. China's dominance in production, cost control, and technology is now being welcomed by Europe, while the U.S. risks falling behind by focusing inward. Unless American automakers can adapt by innovating, lowering costs, and re-entering global markets, they may find themselves sidelined in the very industry they helped pioneer. As China extends its lead in the electric vehicle (EV) market, the question arises, can the U.S. and Europe keep pace, or will they be left reacting to advancements made in Beijing? The answer lies not only in innovation, but also in differing economic philosophies. While the European Union takes a pragmatic approach by opening its market to Chinese EVs, the U.S. has chosen a more insular, protectionist path. This divergence is shaping the future of global mobility, and it may redefine the balance of power in the automotive world. Europe's decision to embrace Chinese electric vehicles is rooted in necessity and strategy. Facing urgent climate targets, EU nations recognize that rapid EV adoption is essential. Chinese automakers offer what European consumers and governments need most: affordable, efficient, and technologically advanced electric cars. Rather than viewing Chinese EVs as a threat, the EU sees them as a tool for accelerating its transition to green transportation. This move also creates opportunities for collaboration. European manufacturers can partner with Chinese firms on battery technologies, autonomous driving, and supply chain optimization. In the long run, such alliances could help Europe maintain a competitive edge while meeting its environmental obligations. The United States, by contrast, has chosen a more defensive stance. Tariffs introduced during the Trump administration aim to protect domestic jobs and industries, but they may be undermining U.S. competitiveness in the global EV market. While shielding American automakers from foreign competition might offer short-term relief, it does little to address the structural challenges the industry faces, namely high production costs, insufficient infrastructure, and limited access to critical raw materials. By isolating itself from global partnerships, the U.S. risks falling behind not just in vehicle production, but in the technologies shaping the next generation of mobility. This divide between European openness and American protectionism carries broader implications. China's dominance in the EV supply chain is well established. It controls vast reserves of lithium, cobalt, and nickel, essential materials for battery production. As Europe leans into Chinese partnerships, China's grip on these resources strengthens. This creates a strategic challenge for the U.S., which is already struggling to secure domestic sources of these materials. As demand rises globally, U.S. automakers may find themselves dependent on a supply chain increasingly shaped by China's economic priorities. That dependency introduces geopolitical risk. China's control over raw materials and advanced manufacturing gives it leverage not just in commerce, but in diplomacy. Should tensions escalate between Washington and Beijing, access to critical materials and technologies could be weaponized. Europe, by engaging China economically, may avoid direct confrontation, but it also risks becoming more reliant on a single dominant player in a sector vital to its future. Meanwhile, infrastructure is another area where the U.S. lags behind. China has built a vast and growing EV charging network, integrated with renewable energy and smart grid systems. Europe, too, is rapidly deploying infrastructure to support its EV rollout. In comparison, the US remains far behind, especially in rural regions where charging options are sparse. This slows consumer adoption and weakens the domestic market's ability to scale. Without a strong internal ecosystem, US automakers are disadvantaged at home and abroad. To stay relevant, the US auto industry must evolve. That means reducing production costs, increasing investment in clean energy infrastructure, and engaging in global supply networks. Innovation must be prioritized, not only in vehicle technology, but in batteries, manufacturing, and logistics. Collaboration with allies, tech companies, and even rivals will be key. Protectionism may serve as a temporary buffer, but long-term growth demands participation in a globalized and increasingly interconnected market. The situation also has profound implications for transatlantic relationships. For decades, the US and Europe have shared close economic ties, particularly in the auto industry. But as Europe aligns more closely with China for technological and environmental goals, that partnership may shift. If the EU becomes economically entangled with China while the US pursues a combative trade stance, their shared influence on global policy could diminish. This evolving dynamic could weaken the West's collective ability to shape international standards in clean technology and transportation. Chinese companies are already exporting not just vehicles, but ecosystems, complete with battery systems, autonomous driving platforms, and artificial intelligence. Their competitive pricing and rapid development cycles make them attractive to countries beyond Europe as well. Emerging markets across Asia, Africa, and Latin America are increasingly turning to Chinese EVs as practical, cost-effective alternatives to traditional combustion engines. As China meets this demand, its global influence expands, cementing its position as a leader in both technology and policy. Even American leaders in the EV space, like Tesla, face growing pressure. While Tesla has pushed boundaries in autonomous driving and battery tech, its production costs remain high, and its global supply chain is increasingly vulnerable to geopolitical shifts. With Chinese competitors catching up in quality and speed, the margin for error is shrinking. The road ahead for the US auto industry will be defined by its willingness to adapt. It can continue down a path of isolation, prioritizing domestic protection over global collaboration, or it can re-engage with the world, invest in innovation, and join the race for a clean energy future on equal footing. The choices made now will determine not only the fate of American automakers, but the nation's role in the next great industrial revolution. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into global tech and policy shifts. Your support helps us keep bringing you insightful content every day.